And welcome to this year's acquisitions end of year setup. And this is kind of a hands-on workshop. We did it last year as well. It's something that I expect to continue to be an annual event. And it's basically a chance to go through all of the steps that you will need to make sure that your funds for acquisitions are ready to close out at the end of the fiscal year. So obviously most of our libraries do close out their fiscal years in June. At the end of June, so you've got a little bit of time, but there's some cleanup involved in getting everything ready. So that's really what today is about, is figuring out what that cleanup is and how to do it so that you can go through and kind of look at what still needs to be taken care of, what may need to be hunted down, and then clean that up before you get to the point that you do want to close out those funds. And we will go through the process of how to close out the funds today, specifically in terms of doing a dry run, which is something that you can do ahead of time just to make sure that everything is going to propagate the way that you'd like it to. That way you've got some time to figure out if anything's going wrong, what you need to do to fix it. So today our goals are to talk about resolving purchase orders and invoices, running end of year reports, rolling over encumbrances, deactivating current funds, and doing an end of year dry run. So that's what we'll try to do today. Later on, probably actually maybe late June, but maybe more likely early July, we will do another workshop looking at getting set up for the next fiscal year. And for those libraries that maybe have not actually completed their closeout, we can also go through those steps live at that time. So you're not totally on your own. I'm not teaching you now and then throwing you to the wilderness to figure it out from there. But this will kind of get you set up to make sure that everything is ready to close out when the time comes. So before we get into any of this, oh, and we'll also talk a little bit about the new year setup. Before we get into any of this, one of the big things that I did want to go over at the beginning, because I know we do have some libraries that are fairly new to acquisitions, that are just kind of getting to figure out what all of this is about. And so I just wanted to give a quick overview of the fiscal year closeout and what it actually is. So we call this the fiscal year closeout. Sometimes we call it just acquisitions end of year, or the year-end process. It can be known by a lot of different things. And if you go through our knowledge book, you'll see it can refer to as kind of all of those things. It's basically a series of actions that allow you to close out your funds for the current fiscal year, and then where appropriate, roll over any remaining balances or lingering encumbrances into funds for the next fiscal year. And what we're doing today is preparing for this process. And that preparation requires ensuring that all of your purchases are fully accounted for, and that any future spending that's going to happen between now and when you actually close out is noted and, if necessary, frozen. This session is going to walk through the process of getting the current year in order, and then there'll be opportunities for you to run through the checklist in your library. So I am going to give you, for the steps that I do in here, an opportunity to follow along. So if you are able to have your Evergreen staff account up in another screen, I'd recommend that you go ahead and have that up so that when I show a process, you'll be able to mimic it. And you don't need to worry that anything's actually going to get closed out. We won't be taking that step today. After ensuring that all housekeeping has been completed, then in this workshop, we'll do a dry run. And that's something that even if you're not attending the workshop, I recommend that you do every year, is a dry run of your closeout to make sure that everything is going to close out as expected before finalizing it. And then the final step of the fiscal year closeout process, after completing the dry run, is to actually do it for real, and then begin to take the steps to set up all of your funds and everything for next year. So we won't actually be getting into that part today, but we will go through all of the steps leading up to it. So the first thing that I wanted to talk about is our year-end checklist. Now, this is something that is available in our knowledge books. I'm going to go ahead and take a look at it within the knowledge book. And this is something that I do recommend that you take time to get used to get familiar with, because this is something that even after this session, as you're going through this process, can guide you through it. Um, so the checklist is this section down here, year-end checklist, and that's basically what we're going to talk about getting ready to do today. It is basically the five steps that you need to take before closing everything out. The first one is kind of the big one that we're going to look at how to do, and that is making sure that all of your pending purchases are accounted for. When it's time to close out, you have to either have ordered everything on a purchase order with this fiscal year attached to it, or you need to delete those purchase orders. You can't have any pending purchase orders before closing out the fiscal year. So one of the big steps is figuring out what's kind of lingering out there in terms of your purchase orders and being prepared to determine, is this something that you intend to purchase before you close out for real, or is this something that's not going to get purchased, and then either activating it or deleting it as needed. Then the next thing is looking to make sure that everything that you have ordered and that you have then received has been marked as received, that you don't have anything that's kind of still lingering as on order when you have received it. And oftentimes, if you're using EDI, this process should be happening automatically. But if you have some non-EDI vendors, or if maybe there has been an issue with some of your EDI messages, this is a good chance to figure out if there's anything lingering kind of in that weird limbo status. The other side of that coin is to also check to make sure that everything has been invoiced properly, and that you don't have any payments that you are expecting to make this fiscal year that are not showing up on an invoice. And then to close out any open invoices. And once you've done all that, then you should be clean, you should be ready to go. And then you just want to make sure that nothing else comes up before you do the closeout. And so what that we recommend you do is to set a date for a year-end spending freeze. And so that's really up to you and your library what you want that date to be. If you want to set it a month ahead or a week ahead or 2 months ahead, whatever you think is going to work for you. It also, one of the things you might want to look at is when an order has been placed, how long does it typically take to be fulfilled by that particular provider, as you're figuring out what the freezes should be. And you may have different freeze dates for different providers. If you have some that move much quicker than others, then you might have a little bit more time to order from them. But that is your choice. So we're kind of go through this today, and I do recommend that you spend some time within not only this chapter, but in general, all of this stuff in the acquisitions knowledge book for acquisitions year end. So you've got the procedure, which is what we're talking about today. You've got the dry run, which we will complete today. And then you have the actual closeout operation and setting up your fund propagation and rollover. So we'll talk about those as well. So before we get into that, are there any questions that people have that they want to make sure get covered, or that they're a little bit unsure about before we even dive into anything? Like I said, feel free to unmute. We're a small group, so you can ask in chat, but you can also just unmute yourself and ask. All right. Well, let's go ahead and get into resolving purchase orders and invoices. And this is really the big step. It's not necessarily the I mean, all steps are really important in this process, because any of them that you skip, you really can't close out. But it is probably one of the larger steps in terms of the volume of the potential workload, depending on where you are with your purchase orders and invoices. So we're just going to walk through how to search for those POs and invoices that need to be resolved, and then we'll talk a little bit about some options for resolving them. So we are going to start by looking at the purchase orders, And basically what you want to do is make sure that you have all of your purchase orders are either close, finished, everything's been received, currently on order, or marked to be deleted. You don't want to have anything pending prior to your closeout. So we're going to take a look at how to find those purchase orders that may be in pending, and then what to do with the ones that you do find. So it's fairly straightforward. Each of these steps involves basically some different methods of utilizing the acquisition search interface. This is probably the easiest of them. So basically from your purchase order interface, you're going to run a search for purchase orders at your system or branch. So I'm in the purchase order search tab here at the top. And so my purchase order agency, I'm going to reset this to Cumberland. And then I want to make sure that I have my status set to pending because that's really what I'm looking for. Are there anything set to pending rather than uh, on order or anything else? So it's a really straightforward search, probably one you've done before. And so obviously I'm in the dev environment and this is not Cumberland's actual situation. This is a set of fake purchase orders that I've put together for this. I rotate through the libraries that I use for these examples. So Cumberland is my choice today. Um, yeah, don't worry, Casey. You're in production. Everything is as it should be. But it is definitely a much smaller group to work with within dev so that I don't get lost in too many potential purchase orders to choose from. All right, so I basically have 3 different purchase orders in a status of pending right now. And so I need to figure out what I want to do with these. Are these all things ready to be activated? Are there some things that maybe I realize now they've been back ordered and there's no way we're going to get them by the end of the fiscal year? And so I just want to cancel them. Did something else happen to make it so that we just no longer want to place this order? So the first thing I'm going to do is ask you all to go into your staff client and perform this same search. And just make sure that you know how to set up the search. It's a pretty straightforward one. You don't need to do anything with the purchase orders at this point, but just kind of see what you have. So I'm going to give everybody a few minutes to do that. And if just once you have completed the search, just go ahead and let me know in the chat. Looks like Stanley's done. All right. Has anybody had any issues with this search? All right. Well, we're going to go ahead and move on to working with these purchase orders and getting them into a state that we can actually close out. If you do have any oddball ones that maybe you're not sure exactly what to do with, feel free to ask about them now. Even if I don't know, I'm sure as a group we can probably figure out what to do with them. But basically, our goal right now And you're not going to necessarily going to be following along with this part because you probably do still have ordering to do before you close out. But my goal right now for these 3 purchase orders is to get all of them into a state other than pending. So let's start with this top one. And so it looks like there's nothing in this one. It's just an empty purchase order. So all I need to do with this one, obviously, I don't necessarily want to activate it. What we want to do is come up here to the PO name, and I'm going to put the word delete into that name. And we do a program that an empty PO with the word delete in it will be deleted on a regular basis. It might be every night. I don't want to necessarily say that it's every night. I think it might be less often than that, but we do have a process that will take care of those. So that's sort of the easiest thing to do. If you have a purchase order that has nothing on it, and it's just kind of lingering in there, you just want to go ahead and mark that one as deleted, and that'll get taken care of for you. So that one was easy. All right. So let's take a look at our next one. So this one, in fact, if I refresh this page, will I get my new name? And of course, now it's going to take a while to load. Shouldn't have refreshed. I don't know why that's not loading. That's really strange. I seem to have been logged out, actually. All right, I'm going to go back to my search, my acquisition search, my purchase order search, and switch this to Cumberland. And switch this to pending. Okay. Yep. And so my name on that one has been changed to have that delete in it. So theoretically, this would be removed automatically as part of this process. Because it's in the dev environment, actually, it probably won't. So there's no way to test that this is going to work properly within here. But I would suggest that you go ahead and do these searches now, and any that are just kind of those empty ones that you want to get rid of, go ahead and get them set up to delete. That way, if there is an issue with that process, if for some reason it doesn't happen, you can let us know and we can get it taken care of before you're ready to actually start your closeout. All right, let's take a look at our next one. And this one has several books. It's got items attached to all of them. I don't see any reason not to order this, so I am just going to go ahead and activate it. And so now it's in on order status. So if I go back to my acquisition search, I'm just going to redo the search instead of trying to refresh this time. Now it's gone away. So it's no longer in that pending status. So let's take a look at our third one. And this one does have an item on it. It is Test Book by Author Test. And so I think that probably I don't actually want this anymore. And so what I'm going to do is first get the purchase order emptied. If you have a purchase order like this where you are no longer planning to purchase this item, we're going to start by deleting the line item. So now my purchase order is empty. And then I'm going to go up here to my PO name and I'm going to put the word delete into it. And so basically I have just, you know what, I think it should be delete without I've left the number in. Let me remove that. Oh, no, it won't let me. Never mind. Okay. So at this point, I should be in good shape to basically say all of my purchase orders have been dealt with. Everything that was pending has now either been activated or has been set to be deleted. Yeah. Okay. So Ananga has confirmed that as long as there is the word delete in the name, it will get deleted nightly. Okay. So yes, go ahead if you do have any of those that you're finding that are ready, that can just be deleted, I'd suggest you go ahead and get that set up, and then check in on it tomorrow or later this week. If anything failed to delete, let us know. I can't imagine that there's going to be an issue. Um, but I'd rather find that out now in April than at the last week of June or something like that. So I would suggest getting those set up as soon as possible. Um, so basically, a lot of you probably aren't at this step now. You probably have a lot of purchase orders that you're kind of maybe sitting on that you're not quite ready to activate. You don't need to activate things right now. You just need to make sure that when you are ready to close out, you have nothing left to be activated. I would suggest you go ahead and do this search now and then go through, and if there are any to be deleted, get those done. If there are any other pending ones, just make a note of them so that you stay on top of them. If anything changes and you decide for whatever reason you're no longer planning to put that order through, you're prepared to go ahead and delete it. Just the sooner you kind of start this process and the more prepared you are for the number of purchase orders that need to be dealt with, the easier it'll be when the time to close out actually comes. So if you would like to go ahead and just kind of scroll through after doing your search, and if there are any that you want to take care of, I'll give everybody a few minutes to take care of those while you're thinking about them, and then we'll move on to talking about invoices. Okay. So when we're talking about cleaning up invoices, it's not that different than the way that we cleaned up our purchase orders. The purchase order cleanup is really straightforward. The invoice cleanup is a little bit more complex, but it's still pretty simple. Um, there's basically two parts to it. So with purchase orders, we were simply looking for anything pending. With invoices, we're looking for either items that or invoices that are still that have been marked received but not invoiced. So you're basically looking for any of those items that for whatever reason have not been properly invoiced, or you're looking for items that have been invoiced but not yet received. So we're going to basically doing two separate searches. So I'm going to start with looking for items that have been invoiced but not received. That one's a little bit easier. So I'm going to start by checking for any invoices that are still open by running another search. And again, oh, I've switched to, when I moved into Stanley, I switched, or moved into invoices, I switched back to Stanley because that is where my workstation is. So I'm going to move that back to Cumberland. So for this particular search, I am looking for invoices that are owned by my system that I'm working from. And then I'm looking for invoices without a closed date, because obviously we have not finished out this invoice yet. And then I'm also going to add an extra line to look for invoice date, invoice date here. And I want it to be this fiscal year. So I'm going to go with is on or after July 1st, 2023. And that just means that if there's anything that's randomly lingering, especially for those libraries that may have migrated, I don't have to worry about that. I'm only looking for the ones that are related to this fiscal year. So I've done this search and there is one. You can tell it's one that I created for this training. So basically what I want to do is figure out what am I still waiting to receive from this invoice? Why haven't I closed it yet? And then once I receive it, I'm gonna mark those items received and I'm gonna be able to close the invoice. So let's go on into the invoice and you can see my line item that's connected to this invoice. So I'm gonna go into it. And on the purchase order itself, basically all I want to do is if I have received this item, I'm going to mark it received. And so once I'm able to do that, then I'm able to close out my invoice. Yep, it's marked as paid now, so we should be all set. Let's come back into our search, and I'm going to redo the search. Close dates does not exist. Oh, I didn't actually mark it closed. That's an important step. So I'm going to click, now that it's been paid, I'm going to close it, and then we're going to come back into our search and redo it. And now there's nothing. So that was fairly straightforward. Obviously, you know, when you're working with real items, real purchase orders, you're going to have a few more items than that, most likely. And once again, you've got a couple of months, so, you know, it's not pressing that this all gets cleaned up now. There are items that you are probably waiting to receive, but this is the time to start getting on top of that, start checking your invoices and making sure that there's nothing that has made it to the library that just hasn't been closed out yet. So go on into those invoices. If you have marked everything received, go ahead and close the invoice prior to your fiscal year end date. So I'll give everybody a few minutes to conduct that search as well. So again, you're in your invoices search tab within the acquisition search, and we have 3 different search facets. So we're looking for the invoice receiver for your library. The close date does not exist, so it's near the bottom of the list here. And then your invoice date is on or after, in my case, July 1st, 2023, whenever your fiscal year did start. That one's not necessary. I'm not even sure it's in the knowledge books as a recommendation, but when I was prepping for this, I did find that there were some lingering things for some systems that were not showing as closed from previous fiscal years. So just for the sake of ease. Though it might be helpful for you to go ahead and see what is out there lingering that hasn't been closed. So you can choose to add that one or not. Okay, and if anyone attempts this search and something odd happens, just let me know. Right, and so our next step is basically to reverse this. In this particular search, we were looking for items that had been invoiced but not received so that we could close the invoices once everything was received. Now what we're going to be doing is something that's a little bit, it's not trickier, it's not a harder search to do, but figuring out what went wrong is sometimes a little bit trickier. Basically, we're reversing the process to look for items that have been received but not invoiced. And this is something that when you're working with EDI is fairly rare. And if you are working with EDI and you find invoices that should have been received via EDI but have not been, that's something that you will need to reach out to your vendor for. So this is another important one to kind of get onto early, so you're not scrambling around with your vendor as you're trying to close out your fiscal year. So the search itself will be fairly similar, except we're not going to be working within the invoices search because obviously the invoice doesn't exist. So we're actually going to be going back to our purchase order search. We're going to stick with having our purchase order agency set to wherever we are. And then we're going to make our first term not purchase order status, but line item status. Simply because the purchase orders, they're, you know, because purchase orders can then end up on different invoices. There may be some things from one purchase order that have a completely different status than other things on that purchase order, and some have been invoiced and some haven't. So we're going to go with line item status. And what we're going to look for is a line item status of received. I'm going to add one more line. And for this line, I'm going to look for invoice date. And again, I'm going to use the does not exist option. So basically, I'm looking for any purchase order for Cumberland HQ. I'm looking for lines on those purchase orders that have been received, but are not connected to an invoice. And I'm doing that by saying that the invoice date does not exist. Once the invoice is created, it has a date automatically. So if the date doesn't exist, that means it hasn't been created. So I'm going to go ahead and search. And Oh, this has a lot of those old migration ones, so I'm actually going to add one more line. To We're going to go down to purchase order date from this fiscal year. So is on or after July 1st, 2023. There we go. So we have a single item that's coming up here, a single purchase order. I'm going to go on into that purchase order, and it looks like yes, I see that Wananga's recommending a report, and that was I was going to show the reports that I recommend for this next. Sorry, I realized that my chat had not been updating, so I was just going back to see what I had missed. So basically, at this point, we have an item that has been received. If I look up here, I see that there is no invoice for it. So I am going to basically create one. Obviously, if this is an EDI situation and it should have been created automatically via an EDI message, that's something that you're going to need to work with your vendor on. If you ordered it from Amazon or something like that, you can go ahead and create your own invoice, or if you got a paper invoice but it hasn't been put into the system yet, you can go ahead and link that. So you do have the option, if you do have a purchase order that has multiple items, of selecting individual line items to go on your invoice, or just turn in the entire purchase order into an invoice, depending on what the situation is and what your needs are. Since this one only has one, obviously we could just create an invoice from the entire purchase order, but just for the sake of showing you that, if I select the line item and I go to my actions menu, I do have the option to create an invoice from selected line items. So I would be able to go ahead and do that. I can also create an invoice for the entire purchase order by just clicking on this link up here at the top. And so if you've never created an invoice from scratch, which I don't think many people do, simply because EDI does the process for them, this is how you do it. So you would give an ID. Obviously, in most cases like this, you have a paper invoice that you received. It's just a matter of linking it into the system. So you would want the ID that you put in here to match the one on the paper invoice that you received. So I'm just going to make one up. The receive method is paper. So even if you received, an emailed PDF of the invoice, you're still going to call it a paper because your other option in here is EDI. And it obviously was not received via EDI. Your provider should have happened automatically based on what was entered for the line item and for the purchase order. For the note, it might help to put in something like whatever reason. And then your payment method, you've got a few different options here. I'm going to put in credit card. Your invoice date should have been filled in automatically. Invoice type, that if that is something that you use locally, you certainly can. I don't have anything that I'm going to put in there. And then payment authorizer, that's something that if you have, if part of your record keeping is that somebody authorizes those payments, then you'd want to put that person in here. And then the shipper and receiver should be filled in automatically to match the provider and then your org unit. Then you'll come down here to the section where you would fill in the invoice information. The amount billed is the amount that was billed. And then when you are ready to close it, that means you should also have paid it. So when you can say that, that amount has been paid, then this section would be filled in. It does automatically when you put in the amount billed, it pays it because, of course, generally speaking, once you've received the book, you have paid for it. But if for whatever reason that's not the case, you can always delete this and fill it in when that payment has gone through. Obviously, you don't want to close the invoice until you have paid it. Then you'll save. And then you can go ahead and close. So it's a little bit trickier than the first one, but it essentially not that different than any of the other things that we have looked at. Now, if the invoice should have been created automatically, like I said, this is definitely something that you want to reach out to your vendor for. Now, as Wananga mentioned in the chat, there are reports that you can run for this demo. Obviously, I have, a couple of POs, a couple of invoices that I'm working with. There's not a whole lot. When you are working with, an entire fiscal year's worth of orders, your search results are going to be a little bit more complex than mine were. So I do recommend that you run a report for these before you get started. And so you can run the report and you can just look things up by their line item IDs or by their purchase order IDs based on that report. You could also run the report just to get an idea of what you have out there, go through and use the search options and go through manually and fix everything, and then run the report again to make sure that it's cleared out. Whatever workflow works for you best is, it's up to you, but the report is something that I recommend that you start with regardless. And so I wanted to show you those reports as well. There are two, and they are in our centralized reports template. So if we come into the reporter, and you come down here to the shared folders, you'll open up the templates and you'll come to admin. So if you are not somebody who works with reports often, you may not be familiar with our centralized reports templates folder, but you can find it under admin, under centralized reports templates. And then we're going to go into our acquisitions templates. You do not need to do this in this case, but generally speaking, when you are working with one of these folders, I do recommend that you change your output limit from 10 to all, because it does not sort them very intuitively when it's limiting to just 10 or 20 or anything. So if you limit your output to all, then you'll actually get an alphabetical sort, which is just easier to work with. In this particular case, they do come up on the first page. So it's maybe not super necessary, but that's just in general a tip that I recommend. So I'm going to be looking for two specific ones. I'm looking for line items invoiced and not received. So that was the second search that we just did. And then line items received and not invoiced. Oh, I'm sorry. Invoiced and not received was the first search we did. And then received and not invoiced was the second. So I would want to take each of these report templates individually, select them, and then come up here to this drop-down menu and choose clone selected template. And I'd recommend that if you have not already set this up on your computer, that you go ahead and follow along with me now so that you can get everything set up and ready to go. So I'll give you a moment to catch up. So if you are not familiar with the reporter, it is under the administration menu and reports. And again, we found our centralized folder by going to the shared folders section, opening up templates, and then admin, and then acquisitions templates. So the first one that we are cloning is list line items invoiced, not received. And this basically will give us that list of what I just ran with the search. And so when you have a much longer list than the search will get you, then this report is really useful to have. So I'm going to clone it, and we do ask that you clone these. You do not run a report directly off of them. Instead, you're basically saving a copy to your own account. So the first thing I'm going to do is clone, and I'm going to choose a folder. Now, if you've never run reports before, you may not have folders set up. So at this point, you would need to set up folders before moving forward. So if that's not something that you are ready to do during this workshop, and you'd like me to walk you through it individually later, I'd be happy to. But I'm just going to go ahead and choose one of my existing folders. And this will bring you into a screen that looks like this. The word clone is going to be attached to it because you did clone it. You can change the title to anything that makes sense for you. If you want to make sure that you're kind of recloning this every fiscal year, just in case we make updates to it, you could maybe add the fiscal year to it, whatever naming convention makes sense to you. And then once you're ready to go, you just click Save Template. So that is your first step. You'll do that for both of them. So I'll come down here to my shared folders under templates and admin and centralized reports templates and acquisitions templates. I'm going to find, I've just done list line items invoiced, not received. Now I want to do list line items received, not invoiced. So I'll select that one and I'll follow the same steps and clone. And then staff reports is the folder I'm saving it to. And I'm going to rename it for the fiscal year and save it. And so now I have two templates that I can run this report off of. And as I said, even if you are going to be using the search to sort of get to the reports that you're using, or get to the items that you're working with, I still recommend the reports because you can run it at the beginning and run it at the end to make sure everything has been caught. But I also, if you wanted to just work directly from the report, that is an option. Because I am in prod now, I don't have my fake things that I've created because you can't really run reports well in dev. So what I'm going to do is hope that Casey doesn't mind if I use Cumberland, if I continue to use Cumberland, because I'm going to go ahead and set up these reports to run now. So I'm going to come down to my line items invoiced, not received, and I'm going to select it, and I'm going to choose from this this menu up here, create a new report from selected template. So now I am in my own folder. All right, I will use Polk on my second one too. That way you can just kind of get an idea of what different systems might kind of end up looking like. So for anybody who's not familiar with reports, now that I've cloned it, it is in my folders. So we were in the shared folder section before. We are now in my folders. And I saved both of these to my staff reports subfolder that I had created. Again, if you don't use reports often and you don't yet have folders in here, you will need to create these before moving forward. But for now, I am here. I'm in staff reports and I've selected line items invoiced, not received. And I'm going to create a new report for selected template. When creating a report, you do need to make sure that you fill in a report name. I'm just going to use the same name that my template is. The naming convention you choose is up to you. Just make sure it's something that you'll remember so that you find the output later. I do have to save it to a report folder. And then I'm going to choose my ordering agency. You know what? I'm already set to Polk here because I was doing some stuff with holds with you earlier. So I'm just going to go ahead and choose Polk. And I think this is the one that Wananga said she had some things for. And I don't remember if you go at the system level or the branch level, so I will just add everything. And so I want to put in my fund year. And so depending on what you call this year, this could be 2023 or 2024. I don't know off the top of my head what Polk is, if it's which one it is. I'm just
2024.
Thank you. Oh, yep, I see it in the chat now. And so you'll see also basically what this report is looking for is items where the line item state or status equals on order. and there is no encumbrance for it. So it's a little different than how we were setting up our search. The reporter is able to get slightly more nuanced. So it's basically looking for something that has been ordered, but no money has been transacted, basically. So I'm going to go ahead and save my output, and I'm going to run the report.
That may be the one I didn't have any results for, but
Well,
we'll see when it comes. Oh, no, you do have invoice not received. Okay. Yeah, that should be the one that had results.
okay. And this one is actually a practice one from yesterday, so we could look at that one too. I think I used Cumberland yesterday. Um, so it ran really quickly, which actually makes me think there's not going to be anything in it because that was really fast. But let's find out. So I'm going to check the box. I've gone into the output section, and I've gone into the output folder I selected when I set up my report. And again, if you're not familiar with reports and you need a little bit more of a walkthrough, let me know and we can always set that up. I've selected the output that I've just run, and now I'm going to choose view report output from the top here. And you can get this in Excel, and I recommend that's what you do. For today, I'm just going to do the tabular output because I can open it right here in my browser. And there are some things. So basically, I've got all of these items that are on order, but are obviously not yet encumbered. So I would want to I can take my purchase order ID, or I can take my line item ID, and I can go directly to the item or the purchase order within my search. Make sure you're actually seeing what I'm seeing. I'm never sure what things are sharing properly in WebEx. Okay. So I've got my line item ID, and I can basically go back into my acquisition search and go into my line item search tab. And I'm just going to search for my line item ID. And that should bring me directly to it. And so then from there, I can determine, is this report was invoiced, not received. So basically, I can go through this. I can see I've been invoiced for this. Have I actually received it? And I can check, is my stack of books or my boxes that have come in recently, whatever it is that I need to do to check to make sure that I actually have received this, at which point I can go into it and into the purchase order.
One of the reasons I like this report is because I can just go into the purchase order and from there you can click catalog on anything that wasn't marked received. And if it's cataloged, clearly we received it.
Yeah, so let's do that real quick. So I've located the line item. I'm going to click catalog. This is going to bring me into the catalog record, and I can see that Polk does have this one. And in fact, it's even checked out. So I'd assume you've definitely received it. So you would mark it received, and then that takes care of that. So depending on how many of them you have, this can be a fairly lengthy process. So again, it's something I recommend you get going on earlier rather than waiting until close to your closeout so you can work through it over time. The other report is very similar. So let's take a look at, I ran it yesterday, so let's just look at that one. This is the line items received, not invoiced. So just the reverse of what we've just done. So I'm going to go ahead and view that. And this is Cumberland. And you're in great shape, Cumberland. Nothing came up for you. So, but it would be a similar process then if you were to get a list of items here, and you would assume that your items received but not invoiced would be a much smaller list, just because that's fairly rare. So what you would want to do is the same thing there. Anything on that list, you'd want to look up that item. First, you'd want to check, is this a vendor that we use EDI for? And then contact that vendor if it is. If it's not, then go ahead and create an invoice. You should have a paper one, hopefully, and you can create your invoice within Evergreen based on that paper one. All right, so that is the general process of doing your cleanup. It is not necessarily difficult, but it can be a large and very detail oriented process. So it's definitely something that I recommend that you get get working on. You can run that report as many times as you want to. If you want to kind of chip away and then recheck the report, once a week or every couple days to see how many you have left. There's no limit on how much you can run that report. Are there any questions about any of that stuff? All right. So let's go ahead and talk about the actual end of year procedure. So that's the sort of housekeeping stuff that you need to get going on before you can close anything out. The rest of it is a little bit more straightforward. It's just working with your funds within acquisitions administration. Um, so we're going to just go on in and look at some funds. All right. So for those of you who do sort of the daily workflow, but not the administration, this section is something that somebody would need to be the acquisitions administrator for. I do think that for the most part, everybody that is working with acquisitions is also working with admin. But if there are any of you who don't regularly work with that, um, obviously feel free to continue following along here, but then bring in whoever does that to the conversation when you're ready to do it. We're going to go to our acquisitions administration splash page, and we're going to go to fund administration. And I believe I'm still working with Cumberland. Oh no, I actually created some fake funds for PAC so that I wasn't messing with anything too real and so that I could also keep it to a very small number. So PAC does not use acquisitions. They do not have any real funds. So these are all fake ones that I set up for them. And basically, what we want to do is once we feel confident that everything in our purchase orders and invoices is kind of set, then that means that our funds are, in terms of the encumbrances and debits, are at a pretty solid place. We don't really want to do this step until we feel good about that. But you can do a dry run at any point. So you could go ahead and practice it as early as you wanted. And that's the first step you're going to do. So we do have 3 different funds to look at today. And we're going to start by talking about what we're really doing when we close them out. We are actually doing a process called propagation and rollover. So for those of you who did the setup for your acquisitions administration, who created your funds, you may remember when you created those funds that you checked boxes for propagation and rollover. Maybe you didn't. Most of the funds do have those boxes checked. Basically, what you did is you told Evergreen that when this fund is closed, propagate a new one, which means create a new one for next fiscal year, and then roll over encumbrances and any balance left on it into that newly created fund. There are some funds where you just want it to propagate, you don't want it to roll over. And then there are some funds that, if it's grant related or something like that, you may not propagate at all. But the kind of default, I guess, is propagation and rollover both applied. So propagation, basically, you're recreating the exact same funds with the same settings in the new fiscal year. You will have to add money to those funds once it's been created. That is not something that happens as part of the propagation because obviously you don't know that you'll get the same amount of money into that fund every year. Rollover does take any unspent money into the propagated funds for next year, and then any money from the current year that has been encumbered but not yet debited, which means if it's been paid for, it gets closed out. That's the end of the story. But if it has basically been encumbered, you've ordered the item, but you have not paid for the item, it will move that forward. Now, I will say that most of our libraries, I believe, do not roll over encumbrances. They may have it set to roll over, but they ensure that nothing is encumbered before they close a fund. So that's depending on what your local practice is. It may be that you need to make sure that there are no encumbrances prior to closeout. And again, that won't change anything in the process that we're doing right now, but it's something that you do need to be aware of and prepared for, and it's an extra housekeeping step. All right, so um, let's take a look at the funds themselves that I'm looking at. And what we can do if we go into the funds is we can basically see, what our balance is, what has been spent, what has been debited. If you are a library that wants 0 encumbrances before closing, then you want to make sure that this encumbrance total line is clear. And you want to make sure that your spent total and your debit total is equal. And that your spent balance is basically the total allocation minus the total debits. So a little bit of math, but if you want to make sure that there's no encumbrances, that's kind of all of the different ways to tell. The main one is obviously that this is blank. And I don't know that I have encumbrances on any of these. Let's check. I do. So I do have an encumbrance of $44 on this fund. So when I close it out and roll it over, then that $44 encumbrance will roll over as well as my unspent balance. And yep, this one also has no encumbrances. All right. So basically what we're going to do at this point is called a dry run. So your propagation and rollover, you set those up when you created a fund. When you create a new fund, you get this pop up and you have these boxes for propagate and rollover. So that's something that you set up at the beginning. When you're ready to close out, you do that by selecting your funds and clicking the fiscal propagation and rollover button. When you're doing a dry run, you do the same thing. I'm going to go one fund at a time. You will generally, actually, no, I'm going to do all of them at once. And then when I close them out for real, we'll do them one at a time. You will generally probably do them in batch. You may not do all of them at once. You may do sort of a selection of them at once, but you can close out as many of these as you'd like to, just getting started. So I've selected all 3 of them, and I'm going to click my fiscal propagation and rollover. And so a couple of things to look for on here. The first thing is the fiscal year. Now, some of our libraries have this fiscal year set for 2024, some have it set for 2023. I believe regardless of what you have set, it will default to showing 2024. So if you are a 2023 library, you do need to change that. In this case, I do have 2024. So I'm going to leave it. If you choose the wrong year, then it will not work. Now, you can, if you are a system that has funds at different branch levels and you're closing out all your branches at once, you would set this to your system and then you could include funds from descendant org units. I think most libraries doing acquisitions do all of the funds from a specific branch. So if that's the case, then you're probably just going to set it to that branch and that's it. But if you do have multiple branches, that funds for multiple branches, or you have funds at the branch level, but you're working from the system level, then you'd want to make sure that you're including funds from descendant org units. That basically means from your branches when you're set to the system level. Fund propagation. So this just gives you a quick overview of what it does. So you're creating new funds for the next fiscal year. When we do the closeout, we will move everything into that new fund. You can propagate without closing out. And so that allows you to kind of keep your encumbrances and everything on the old fund. So you can choose to do that. You can choose to not roll over. And so if you have a situation where maybe you still have a lot encumbered and you don't want to roll those encumbrances over, that could be how you do that. I am going to do the perform fiscal year closeout, which means that I am going to propagate. I am going to roll over when I propagate. The propagate will happen automatically. The rollover will happen if you select this checkbox here. The second checkbox is dry run. This is very important the first time you do it. Don't perform this unless you've done a dry run first. So make sure that you're doing a dry run before you move forward. And the reason for that is that this will tell you exactly what will happen, and you make sure that that's what you expect to happen. If it doesn't match what you expect, then you have a chance to go in and figure out what's going on prior to actually closing things out and rolling funds over. So I've got both perform fiscal year closeout and dry run checked. And I'm going to click process. And so this is going to give me a summary of what's going to happen when I do this for real. It tells me this hasn't happened yet. Then it tells me how many funds propagated. It was 3, which is good because that's how many I selected. It tells me how much unspent money was rolled over. And it tells me how much in encumbrances was rolled over. Now, if I were to remove the rollover and closeout checkbox and reprocess this, then I get the same funds. 3 funds are propagated for fiscal year 2025, but no money has changed. So I have not moved forward a balance. I have not moved forward any encumbrances. So your choice to do this is based on what your local practice is in terms of whether or not you move money forward. You also can, do some math magic, I guess, to the funds that you have, if to the allocations that you have in your funds, if you don't want to roll that over into next year. So you can mess with it that way as well. Are there any questions about what any of this means before we go on and do it for real? And you can perform as many dry runs as you need. You can do one after this session, you can do one right now, and then you can do it again, you know, next month. You can do it continuously up until you're ready to do it for real. And so if you kind of want to keep an eye on what's happening with those rollover funds, you can perform dry runs as things change with your encumbrances and all that. All right. If anyone is going to attempt a dry run now, go ahead, and just if you run into anything confusing, please let me know. So obviously, we're still a couple of months out from closing funds. So a lot of you probably are not ready to actually look at what the real closeout process looks like, but I'm going to go ahead and do it just so that you've seen it live. What I will let you know is that prior to doing that, there are a couple things that you need to do beyond the housekeeping we've already talked about. The first thing that I would recommend is to set your dates. Set a freeze date, by which point you will not be ordering anymore. And set a closeout date. Know which date this closeout process is actually going to take place on. And so you may want to make it so that your freeze date is 1 month before your closeout date or something like that. So you have plenty of time for those orders to come in, especially if you do not want to roll over encumbrances. This gives you a chance to have as few encumbrances outstanding as possible, or even ideally none. So figure out what your freeze date is and figure out what your closeout date is so that you know when this is happening, and anyone else who is ordering items with you also knows. And then otherwise, I think all we have left to do is to actually close this out for real. So I'm going to recheck my perform fiscal year closeout box, and I'm going to uncheck dry run. So I'm getting this note in yellow. We'll do a closeout for real. If you need to double check first, check the dry run checkbox. I've already done it. I feel confident that what I want to happen will happen. And so I'm going to go ahead and click process, and we'll see. So again, I get my summary. This time I do not have that bullet point saying that this hasn't happened for real. I just have 3 funds propagated for 2025. This is the amount of money that rolled over. This is the amount of encumbrance that rolled over. I'm going to close this and now I'm going to check them. So these are the original 2024 funds that I had. You can see in the active column, they now say no. Additionally, I have 1 cent into my balance here for the training fiction fund. I'm not sure why I should not have any money. So that might be something to look into. But what I'm going to do is come over here to my year column and I'm going to change the filter from 2024 to 2025. And now you can see that I have 3 funds for 2025. They already have the balances rolled over. Now, at this point, as I'm setting up for my new fiscal year, I'm going to, allocate money and all that kind of stuff. I may not be doing that in the same step of closing out. Sometimes it can take a little while to find out how much money I'm getting. Um, so, that's something that may be a very separate step, and we're not really going to get into right now. We will have another session sometime over the summer where we'll talk about that process. But basically, all of my 2024 funds have been closed, and all of my 2025 funds have been created and activated. And they do already have a balance because I did actually roll over, which you may not choose to do. But um, in this version of it, that's what I did. Um, so that is pretty much the process. Couple of things. Oh, that's not the right. A couple of things to do at this point. Check for your encumbrances. If you did have encumbrances that you expected to roll over and that you wanted to roll over, those will be showing up. So if I go into my funds, I will not see a blank encumbrance. I rolled over my balance. If you do not want to, then you want to make sure that that balance is 0. Let's go into this. And actually, let's look back at our 2024 funds. I'm going to open it up and I see my balance is 0 and I have no encumbrances. On fiction, this one did have an encumbrance before. It had $44. There's no encumbrance now. It does have a balance of 1 cent. Again, I'm not sure why. I'm not really sure why that happened. Maybe it's just such a small amount. I'll look into that and try to see if I can figure out why that happened, but I'm not going to do it right now. And then my third one, also an encumbrance of 0 and a balance of 0. So everything closed out as expected. And then, of course, in my 2025 funds, if I open them up, I see in this case, my balance is whatever was left over, and it does match my allocation total. And so that's a key thing to note. Now, if for whatever reason you don't actually roll over funds from year to year, but you within Evergreen you do, then once you figure out how much money will go into this fund and you're ready to allocate it, you can simply subtract the remaining balance in here from the total allocation you would make normally, and you can have so that the allocation kind of comes out even. That's kind of, if this is how you do the reporting, the fiscal reporting for your county, I would recommend against doing that. But if this is just kind of for your own records, then that's an option. My spent total, of course, is 0. My encumbrance and debit totals are 0 or blank. And that should be the case in all of them, where my balance matches my allocation. In this case, my spent balance is different than that allocation because of my encumbrances. Now, once the invoice that this is tied to is closed out, this encumbrance will go blank. And then that debit, though, will stay at 44 because, of course, as far as Evergreen is concerned, I spent $44 in 2025 fiscal year. And then finally, in my last one, once again, because I have no encumbrances, I have no debits, and my spent balance and combined balance match, and my combined balance matches with my allocation total. So everything kind of came through as expected. And everything looks the way that I expected it to. Now, we are not going to get into too much detail with starting a new year, but I will give a couple of just pointers about it so that you can think ahead. When you are getting ready to set up your new fiscal year, you may need to go in and deactivate old funding sources. So, if you had a grant or something like that that is not going to be carrying forward into the new fiscal year, you want to deactivate that. If you do have any new funding sources, you want to create those and then apply credit to them. And then, of course, you want to create any new funds that you'll have for this year that were not part of your propagation, and then allocate money across your funds for the new fiscal year. I'm not going to do the demo right now. I will save that for when everybody's a little bit closer to getting this set up. But basically, the process of setting up for the new fiscal year is just like if you have set acquisitions up for the first time recently, it's going to be the same process. And that is pretty much everything that I had planned to cover today. We do have some time though, so if there are questions, if people want to dig into anything, I'm happy to. There's anything that we went a little too quickly in, or anything that you maybe tried and didn't work the way you expected. And Wanangwa has put in the chat that she is available if folks have questions, which is fantastic because she is definitely my go-to expert for acquisitions. So she's definitely somebody um, that you can get great answers to any of your questions. All right, so like I said, I did record this, so I will share it with the Basecamp acquisitions group. Feel free to also share it then with any of your colleagues that may benefit from it. There is quite a bit in the knowledge book about the year-end process. So as you're starting this, as you're going through it, that's a good place to go check for questions and things like that. And feel free to reach out to me or on Basecamp or to other experts within the consortium. Acquisitions is, it can be kind of tricky sometimes. And of course, the end of year process is something you only do once a year. So often it can be hard to kind of remember back exactly what you did last time. So feel free to reach out with any questions. And otherwise, I will let everybody go. I appreciate you being here. And let's see. Yes. Once we finish this, just give me a minute to kind of reset and then I'll give you a call. All right. So I appreciate everybody being here. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, hopefully I will see you all in June or July to kind of talk about the new setup, the new fiscal year setup process. Have a great day and good luck.